I never would have imagined where my career would have taken me and the experiences I would have. And back in the early days of first traveling to Europe, I remember thinking, I'm going to write down, where I've been. And I just recently got back from my 64th trip to Europe.
Holy cow.
My travels have taken me, as I mentioned, Singapore and a few places in Asia. And, the goal is come to work, do work safely, and go home, right? And there are certainly jobs that are more risky than others. And how do you help mitigate that risk or eliminate it altogether?
What's going on, everybody? My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening and watching the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Today, we're coming back with another amazing guest. We got Aaron Johnson in the house. Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Today, we're going to have a really fun conversation about your career journey, kind of all the different ebbs and flows of how it goes, because it's never a straight linear line. But I know today, your current day, you work at Mitigation, and you are the Managing Director of International Business Development. Did I get that right?
Yes, big, long, fancy title just basically means sales guy.
Sure. Love it. So yeah, we'll talk about your current day, and then we'll kind of go through your story. But I always tell people, how do you usually introduce yourself? If you're on one of your many plane rides that you take when you're doing international trips all the time, what do you tell somebody if you got a chatty Cathy next to you on that flight?
Yeah, that's a great question. I say I work for an industrial safety company. We make a wearable that helps organizations understand the frontline workers' experiences and exposures when it comes to health and safety risks within an organization. That's kind of the quick and easy answer of it, but we're looking at environmental working conditions like heat exposure or sound exposure. We're also looking at human emotion, physicality. How physical is the job? Exertion, slips, trips, and falls. We're collecting a lot of that data, and we're doing it all in real time to help organizations kind of look where are we at most risk? Is it a department? Is it an area? What are the clues that are leading to those? And we're measuring things that folks don't either measure at all or they don't measure very often. There's requirements around doing sound checks. What kind of noise exposure are teams, at? They do those spot checks, a couple times a year or, however their program goes. But we can collect it. If you had 100 workers, we're collecting 100 samples all day, every day to really understand what our team is really experiencing on a day-to-day basis, where the variability is. And then we're using that data to also uncover hidden risks that you didn't even know were there. We had one example where the strain on a job wasn't even documented. It didn't seem like it was even a big deal, but it was showing up in a thing we call Motion Explorer. We can kind of stack rank the team to say who's the most physical to the least physical to see who's maybe most at risk of ergo or musculoskeletal disorder type injuries. And so we helped one organization by, they said, well, why are these two folks at the top of our Motion Explorer? They have the least physical job. At least that's what they thought, until we actually did some observations around that and found, nope, there's actually one part of that process that because of their stature, they were having to use a lot of forceful motion and high exertion in order to do their job. And once they made that observation, they bought a tool for this team and completely eliminated that out of the job altogether. And then, again, eliminating that risk. So that's the long answer to the very short question you asked in terms of, but the complexity of understanding health and safety within an organization, the types of data that we're collecting, it's cutting edge. It's very exciting. I mean, that's just the kind of the surface level of what we're doing and how we're helping organizations be safe.
Sure. No, I love to hear it. And we'll definitely jump into kind of like how the company started and all that stuff, because it's super interesting. It would be more of a tech startup if I had to coin it something, but absolutely. we can talk about that in a second. But I know before we jump into your backstory, I know you and I know each other from, we were trying to remember here, like probably 10 years ago when I first met you, because you were at your previous employer, AccuMold, which is a micromolding company.
Right.
But I was also just getting into video. I think Joey had connected us, and it was that's kind of how we know each other. So.
Yeah. I think it was an Ankeny economic development kind of project you were working on that I was also participating in. I think that's how we first met. Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah,
it's kind of crazy too, because now they've rebranded it to the Ankeny Business and Industry Collective. Still a very long name. Didn't shrink down on the syllables there, but. It's 11 years now I've been doing that project for them. So it's kind of it's a fun thing to still be involved in, since it was like the first paid project I ever did, almost 12 years ago now.
Awesome.
So kind of fun. But jumping back into your story, I think it would be beneficial for people to know again, kind of your career path and your journey. Cause, you know, going from Chicago and in radio to getting to where, like you said, you're traveling all over the world talking about wearable safety technology. Like how does your career path start, and like where does your story start? Like where'd you grow up and that type of thing?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey, and I tell people all the time that my career has kind of been this series of left turns. They're all connected if you kind of looked at the thread backwards. But, you know, one day I woke up and you mentioned Acumel, my previous employer, a manufacturing company. I used to think, how in the world did I end up working in manufacturing? You know, if I was in high school or even early college and you asked, you know, where do you see yourself in 10 or 20 years? Manufacturing certainly wouldn't have been on the list. Health and safety wouldn't have been on the list, right? I mean, it's the opportunities that have presented themselves and how I've kind of reacted to those over the advice I typically give when I'm talking to young folks that are just at the beginning of their journey. You know, I began my career, I graduated college with a degree in mass communications. It was kind of a marketing type degree. But I was thinking, you know, not that long ago, you know, today you can get a degree in social media, and there's all sorts of nuances to marketing, and especially with the internet and the changes. You know, in the mid 90s when I was graduating, the internet was brand new. AOL, if you were still, you know, if you were around at that time and online, you know, that was the big thing. And you know, the opportunities there were just starting to grow. And so I started my career thinking I was going to be in broadcast radio, both, you know, more in the production side of things. I do have a face for radio, but I don't have the voice for radio. It's not deep enough or something. But I enjoyed the back end, the network, the production side of it. But, you know, did a little both of that over the first part of my career. And there was an opportunity to take a job here in Iowa. It was kind of the catalyst. My wife and I had been married for a number of years. We were just starting to have kids and thinking about, you know, my commute in Chicago. I lived in the near north side for a while, but then we ended up moving further north into the suburbs. And it was a 52-mile, you know, door-to-door journey. And in Chicago rush hour, that could be 2 hours, you know, depending upon when I left. But I'd take the train in, and it was like an hour and 45 minutes door to door on a regular basis each way, right? So the idea of moving to Iowa and, you know, living and working in the same area and having a 25-mile commute and a 25-minute commute, just that seemed like, wow, my goodness, and getting, you know, basically 2 or 3 hours of my life back every day with that, you know, with that job change. Sure. And came for a job to do some radio production, and it was a great experience. And that's where I kind of met a team, a company called REL Productions, and through that ended up taking a job there long term where my career moving from radio kind of morphed into video production and taking those skills and experiences and doing more corporate video work and kind of driving into the more corporate marketing scene type of thing versus just specifically on a radio kind of format.
Were you doing like audio technician stuff, or were you running a camera? Like what part in the process did you help with REL?
Yeah, my main function was production, editing. I was doing all of the main editing and some of the graphic work because another piece of my journey, what was interesting, before I even left Chicago, I had gotten involved with web development in the very, very early days when it was basically just HTML. I mean, all the rest of it, it was, you know, just starting in terms of how you build sites. And you think about websites in the mid to late 90s, you know, crazy and almost horrible by today's standards. But I had started to learn graphic design and HTML, and it was kind of a hobby. It was thing I enjoyed. Art was, you know, something that I always enjoyed as you know, as a kid growing up, and things I dabbled in. And I took that kind of hobby, and then all of a sudden I found myself kind of doing that on the side at work. So I'm working in radio, I'm working for the network, and all of a sudden I found, hey, can you help us with this web development or with this type of thing, right? And so all of a sudden my hobby kind of started to incorporate into my day job. Well, that's what in part also led me to Iowa, where my first official role when I took the job in radio production here in Iowa also came with web development as part of the role. And then those skills kind of moved into the video production side of things. I was very familiar with, editing systems, digital editing. I started editing audio on tape and razor blades, and it's
actually cutting tape,
literally, right? And so it was a good way to learn because you kind of really understand the concepts of what the digital is trying to do there. But it just was kind of a natural fit for me to move into more of the agency space, focused on the editing side of the business. But, we were a small organization, so it was all hands on deck, and, everything from being a grip to a stand-in to, the graphics and the editing and the whole kit. And did that for a number of years, really enjoyed that because the variety of the clients, that from your production work and just kind of working with different companies and learning about them. Some of those things I still hang on to today as just great experiences.
Sure. There's even videos I've done, I did one for the Iowa DNR. Now I'm an expert in trout hatcheries because I went to one and learned rainbow trout are only native to one stream in the entire state of Iowa. So if you're fishing trout, it's all over the state. They take it from there and they put them all over the state. It's I will probably take this random knowledge. I'll be I have a liberal arts degree of general studies of everything from just doing video production for a variety of people.
No, that is totally true. That is totally true. Along the way, there was a connection I had in Ankeny. I live in Ankeny still, and there's a company called Accumold, who was looking really for their first marketing person and starting to grow their team. And through kind of a mutual connection, reached out to me, hey, anybody interested in a job here in marketing? And me. And it was the first time, I talked about the long commute from Chicago, and now I'm Ankeny to West Des Moines, 25 minutes, 25 miles. People used to ask all the time, where are you from? And it's well, how long do I have to live in Iowa before I say I'm from Iowa, right? And that usually came down to, I think I decided early in my career, when I started to complain about Iowa traffic, that's when I knew I had become an Iowan. And that happened about 8 years in. It was I got to go all the way over to West Des Moines from Ankeny, right? And living in Chicago, that's like going to the grocery store. It's just what you get used to in living in big metropolitan areas. Well, the idea of being able to work and live in the same town was just mind-blowing to me. And Accumold was just down the street from where I lived, and great opportunity. I loved the team at Accumold and helping them grow, and being a part of a lot of success there is a fantastic opportunity, and worked there for 18 years. This is quickly kind of morphing into kind of where I got to Make You Safe, but even that story is just kind of fascinating. Focused on at Accumold, part of the marketing and sales team. We did a lot of international business, a lot of international trade events. And I happened to be in Singapore one fall at an event. And I don't do a lot on social media. Photography is my one little hobby. Somebody asked once if I had a hobby. I didn't think I did until I realized I had 50,000 photos on my iPhone. It's okay, maybe photography is my hobby.
Sure. How many gigs of storage do you have on that thing?
Well, I pay for the cloud service. It's the only way it was ever going to work. But
you got a huge external hard drive just taped to this, like a brick. You're going to take phones. It looks like you're calling from the 90s. Pull the antenna out. Hello.
It would have to be that. But what I found was oh, no, I actually do have a passion for mostly landscape, but sometimes it's a little bit of a senior architectural or big city type stuff. And so the only social media I really do is Instagram. And it's just, like I said, my handle is incidental photography. And it's really things that I see along the way with my phone. I'd love to have a nice, big SLR with, big piece of glass and have all that. But I can't travel with all that, especially when I'm traveling for work. And, obviously the cameras on the phones have gotten so much better, but, there's still limitations to it. So I do what I can with my iPhone, and that's just kind of the motif and the constraints I put around it. So I posted it was in Singapore, and the airport has probably one of the most fascinating shopping centers in the world, in my opinion.
In Singapore?
In Singapore, attached to the airport. And they have within that is a rainforest waterfall fountain. And it's like this 3, 4, 5-story waterfall that falls down the center of the building, of the center of this building, and around it is kind of an indoor rainforest park, if you will. It's massive. It is unreal.
I just watched Crazy Rich Asians like 2 days ago, and that is in the movie because they fly into Singapore. So.
Right, exactly. Well, that takes place there at the Marina Bay Sands, which is the looks like the ship on top of the 3 buildings, the hotel there. But Singapore is one of my favorite cities in all the world. But and part of it is just the architecture. I love big cities and the culture and the things that are cool about Singapore. Anyway, so I take this picture of this fountain and I post it on my Instagram. Well, my Instagram automatically posts that over to Facebook. I've left that switch on because then it makes it look like my Facebook's active, and I don't do a ton on Facebook, and it's just a long time ago kind of thing. Anyway, Gabe, our co-founder at MakeYouSafe, happened to be in Singapore at the same time. He sends me a message and says, "Hey, are you in Singapore?" "No way, I am too." And he sends me a picture of the exact same picture I had posted. And so we were literally in that same area at the same time. We just didn't know it and hadn't run into each other. Well, Gabe lives about 1.5 miles from me. I've known Gabe for ages, knew about MakeYouSafe as he was beginning, and he had shared a little bit of that along the way. But I hadn't, seen or really spent any time with him before COVID. So it had been a couple of years since we really caught up. And here we are all the way around the world and happened to be in the same town at the same time. And we met up before he had to go home and just had one conversation led to another. And the next thing I knew, it's like I'm joining the MakeYouSafe team after 18 years at Accumold. And it was a tough decision. Like I said, I love the work there. I love the people there. But the opportunity to really kind of do something different really kind of intrigued me, and another opportunity to help a company grow and focus on international business. So it's, that's the journey that's gotten me there could never have been predicted, right? It's like I never would have said I'm going to end up at a tech startup working on health and safety, trying to, tell our story around the world. But if I could look backwards and see all of the nudges, all of the things, the interests, the things that incorporated into my, my hobby life that kind of morphed into my work life, it's just a wild journey, at least, from my standpoint, looking backwards.
Sure. Well, it's super interesting because it seems like travel's obviously been a theme here with everything, not even when you were in Chicago, just traveling to the office for 2 hours every day. I think it's interesting, though, like the travel experiences as you bebopped around, because when you're at Accumold, they're like a micro molding company, so they make like little tiny pieces and parts. You could put I think of ag companies when they say, "Oh, we got to go expo. We need to ship our product there and pay a couple $100,000 just to get our combines or tractors or whatever there." You could fit your entire product catalog in your briefcase. So tell me about that experience of being like, we got the next big thing, and you crack your suitcase open. It's like a little tiny piece of plastic.
Yeah. So injection molding, we made, Accumold focuses on, custom plastic components for a variety of industries. Medical device is a big one. And micro, as you mentioned, micro molding has been really their, really what their expertise has been since the genesis in the mid-1980s, way ahead of its time when it came to how to make small parts efficiently with high accuracy. And we're talking about accuracies of just a few microns. And if you don't know what microns are, most people's hair are about 90 microns in diameter. Not my hair, but normal people's hair, right? People with hair.
Sure.
Anyway, high accuracy micro components for, like I said, a variety of industries. And so we could have 100,000 parts that maybe they're only a few, maybe a millimeter wide, and you could fit that all in a little jar.
Sure.
So certainly logistics for the type of things that we did was really not an issue. And that's where people from all over the world, companies from all over the world would come to Ankeny to source their microplastic components because A, the logistics was, not a big deal, and B, the expertise and the skill of our tool makers and the processors and being able to build these parts efficiently and effectively, was huge. Not too many people in the world were focusing on what we were able to do because there was an art and a skill to that we had developed over 30 plus years of the focus. But it certainly made travel and doing trade events a lot easier. I used to say I love that we sell small things because they do pack up nicely. And the big heavy machinery definitely is a lot more logistics to it all. So
sure. Well, we did a video production for a large ag company out of Canada that was doing the Farm Progress show like last year, 2 years ago. And it's like a month-long process just to ship it here. It's like, I'm like, wow, Aaron's got it good. Like, just stick it in the suitcase and go. Like, that's it needs to go.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was definitely an advantage there that we took, for sure. And, the travel I've been very blessed in my career to experience a lot of wonderful, cool places around the world and where our work has taken us. And another one of those things where I never would have imagined where my career would have taken me and the experiences I would have. And it's been a fun journey. Back in the early days of first traveling to Europe, I remember thinking, I'm going to write down, where I've been just for posterity. I'm just curious when somebody asks, well, how many times have you been to Germany, right? I would never be able to know, as time goes on. So I started keeping a journal. It's just something I kept in my phone. And it's literally just which countries I'd been into and what year. And I just recently got back from my 64th trip to Europe.
Holy cow.
And yeah, it's added up over the last 15, 16, 17 years, whatever it's been since I've been traveling so much to Europe. But it's fun. I've seen a lot of Europe. And my travels have taken me, as I mentioned, Singapore and a few places in Asia. And recently finally got to check Sydney off my bucket list. There was a very large global safety congress that this year it was being hosted in Sydney. So it was not only a neat event and great for work, but it was a kind of a nice personal opportunity to check Australia off the list of all the places that I hadn't been. But you definitely have to like travel, for the type of work that I'm doing, and it is something I do enjoy. And so, when I talk about, how do you, what's the difference between, a career and you're starting out and things you like to do and things you don't like to do? They say, make your hobby your career, but then they say don't do that because then it ruins it. There's just all sorts of advice around that. And, certainly I think a way to figure out how to enjoy what you're doing is a big part of that. And fortunately for me, I enjoy the travel aspect of it. And it's allowed me to see a large part of the world while I'm doing business and getting things done for the organizations I'm working for.
Sure. Well, the travel piece is super interesting because, like you said, if that was an interest of yours, you've literally seen the world through your work, which is really cool. Some people have to wait till they're retired or join the military to do it or something like drastic like that. You can kind of do it as you're going there. What was kind of the biggest piece of it for you from the personal side? Like, do you travel during vacations now, or are you so traveled out that when spring break comes, like we're on spring break right now, you're clearly not somewhere warm or somewhere exotic? Where does the travel fall on your personal side now?
Yeah, occasionally I'm like, I just got home. Do I really want to go somewhere? But for the most part, it turns into a different kind of travel, right? And traveling with family and doing different things and really being more, on the leisure side of things. I do enjoy that piece of it. While I get a piece a day or an afternoon here and there and business travel to maybe experiencing something interesting, or last time I was in Europe, I had a weekend because the travel responsibilities kind of fell over the weekend, and so I do have some downtime, but sometimes I'm by myself, sometimes I'm with a colleague, but so I do try to reserve the travel with family to be just not say, I don't want to travel again, right? Because it can easily fall into that. But at this point, I've got 4 grown kids. 2 of them are getting married this summer. So that's going to be a big change for our lives. And we're just talking about, what's the next big group thing that we're going to do? And now we'll have two spouses that kind of have part of the family. And so our family's growing. And we've always loved to travel as a family. It's one thing we did with kids. I've taken the whole family to Europe a couple times just to kind of give them that experience. And then we've traveled all over the U.S. And so, whether it's driving out to Colorado or down to Florida or, what have you. And it's fun because as my kids have gotten older, my oldest daughter has a little bit of aspect where she's traveling for part of her job, and she's old hat at it. She knows how to navigate it and can go and bounce around the country. She was in West Virginia a couple weeks ago. She was in Nashville last weekend for some things. She's been up to South Dakota. So, super exciting places. But it's fun to see, unlocking the world. I think there's some, if you haven't kind of crossed that opportunity and had opportunity to travel far and get on an airplane and go to Europe or go to Asia or go somewhere, I always just encourage people, just pull the Band-Aid off, do it. It is easier than you think it is. People are just people, especially when you're going to major, cities like London or Paris, where there's a lot of tourists. There's all sorts of advice and blogs and videos and things you can prepare yourself with if you want to understand what you're going to. But you find that navigating the world today, is so much easier than it was just even 15, 20 years ago. So I mean the number of kids that get to do the study abroad is just skyrocketed. And that's great because that just really opens opportunity up. And so I try to encourage, my kids to travel, when they can, just because I think that it's just good for, life and understanding other cultures and how you fit in. And it might open an opportunity you didn't know was there.
Sure. Well, I know I did study abroad when I was in college. I did London, Paris, and Amsterdam. So 5 days in each city. So that was a good, kind of dip your toe in, but it was also college led. So I just show up at the airport. I don't have the travel itinerary. I don't have to book anything. It's really nice that way. So then when my wife and I went on our honeymoon to Greece for 2 weeks, I had to become the travel itinerary guy. And that's a very stressful role if you've never had to do it. Are you kind of that person where you make the plans, the plans, or do you have someone in-house that plans everything out and you just execute the plan?
Yeah, no, it ended up being me. And I learned that skill and it became kind of my unofficial role, especially even today to a certain extent. But when I was at Accumold, we did a lot. I have a lot of colleagues and we would a variety of different events or customer visits and whatnot. So I became the de facto expert on international travel and all that.
You got Skyscanner bookmarked and you got your autofill. Did you have I'm sure the amount of travel miles you had on either your company or personal card, you probably could have flown around the world 30 more times if you wanted to.
Yeah, some of it is just how do you book a flight and do that well, and understanding multi-city and when to fly domestic and when to take the train. How to navigate hotels and some of the expectations. Again, it's not hard. It's just that it just comes with experience and doing it once, and then kind of understanding. Okay, yeah, I made a few mistakes, and I probably shouldn't have booked that or done this, type of thing, like anybody would. But doing it over, 17, 18, almost 20 years, I've learned a few things over the years of how to do it cost effectively, but also, not killing yourself to do it as well.
Because when you're doing this too, are you flying economy, middle seat most of the time? Are they at least giving you business class? Because there's a very different level of travel depending on how luxury you go. Because it's people could love travel if it's more of a relaxed setting, or if you're between two very large people in a very small plane every single day, you're like, this sucks,
For the most part, from a corporate standpoint, it's booked economy. Now that being said, at Accumold, I had the fortune of traveling with our CEO a few times, and he's fantastic to travel with for a lot of reasons. He's just a fun guy to be with. But one of the things is, I don't know if it's a written rule or a mental rule of his, but he won't make you sit where he won't sit. And so, flying to Asia business class a few times, it does spoil you a little bit. But I have flown to Asia without business class. And so, fortunately, it's not middle seat elite. I can stay away from the middle seats for the most part. But when you travel enough and you get some status, you get opportunities for upgrades. And I've certainly taken advantage of that. But that, it's one of those things where you have to travel a lot in order to get those perks, and traveling a lot means you're away from home a lot. And so it's just there's a double-edged sword to all that. But I can say that, yes, you can get spoiled riding up front, and it's hard to go back and coach. But I just came home from Europe a couple of days ago in coach. So
sure.
It's not horrible. I mean, I've been on a 16.5-hour flight. I've been on these 8 or 9 hour flights to Europe. To me, the trips to Europe is more like it's just part of getting there and getting home. So I guess I don't get too hung up on the seats so much, but I can't deny sitting up front is much nicer.
Sure. Because what would be the longest flight you've done? Singapore's probably up there. That's the complete opposite side of the globe.
Yeah, so. I think at the time it was San Francisco to Singapore, which I think was like a 16.5-hour journey. I think there's a few other longer flights that are around today, but that's up there. That's a long way. Flying to Sydney crazy, was a long way too. Is about that too as well.
In less than one day, you can be on the other side of the world. That's insane to me. I think, but
no, and I'll tell my wife. I traveling many times over a lot of years, and I still kind of have that fascination of waking up in Europe and going to bed in my own bed on the other side of the world, or standing in Singapore or Sydney or Hong Kong and thinking just spatially, where am I in the world? And that it's still mind-blowing even after all these years, the fascination of just how big our world is, but yet at the same time, how close it really is, and how small it's become with technology for sure.
Sure. Well, I think too, people that have like private jets, like the amount, like you'd be like, man, I really want to go to like a Dodgers game today. Oh, it starts in like 2 hours. Let's just get on the plane and go. We'll be there. And we can probably I'll book the flight for the tickets on the plane. We'll get in. Like if you have those resources, it changes how you live. It's not a 5-day drive road trip. It's like get on the plane and go,
Right. Yeah, it's a degree of accessibility, right? And the world is more accessible to us, everyday people, more than it ever has been. You can find some fairly decent, prices to fly to Europe. In some cases, I recently had a trip out west and to Washington State, and the ticket was almost as expensive as a ticket that I had to get to go to Europe. So sometimes even domestic flights can be a little crazy. But the accessibility has definitely opened the world up, and just absolutely take advantage of it if you can.
Sure. What's been one of the harder pieces of your travel schedule with having kids, being married, like being away from home? What's like the longest stretch you've been away? And then what have been some coping ways that you've been able to still stay connected to the family while you're gone so much?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was harder on my wife when our kids were younger. Fortunately, I think when I started hitting the larger travel stride, our kids were a little bit more self-sufficient. But it's trying to find, how do you not miss important things, and working around those. I tried to make sure that my schedule could work around that. A lot of my schedule was predetermined around some trade events, and so. The one hand, they were immovable. On the other hand, they were predictable. And so I had a very predictable calendar, so I could look 12 months out and say, okay, so we could plan around some of those types of things. So it definitely took some planning. when I first started traveling internationally, cell phone data plans were outrageous, and it was difficult. I ended up finding T-Mobile was one of the first domestic carriers that had a very, very inexpensive, or at that time it was part included, where I could call back and have data in Europe for no extra cost. Now they've all kind of leveled out, and I think it's, depending upon your plan, it's actually pretty inexpensive. And so, for me, it was part of, okay, Skype in the early days before, FaceTime was so prevalent. And now it's just making sure I stay connected, every day, with the family and being involved. And the shift in the time zones sometimes makes that difficult, and you just have to be mindful of that, especially when you're doing it. You just have to be very conscientious of it. The longest I've been away, interestingly enough, at Accumult, I was gone 2 weeks, I think was the max, here and there. Most of the time, it was leave on a Saturday, come home on a Saturday type of thing. But occasionally it would spill over into the next week or something like that. Okay. But as part of my transition to Make You Safe, it just the way everything worked and aligned in what we were trying to do. My very first day on the job was to get on a plane and fly to Munich and be in Europe for 5 weeks straight.
Holy cow.
Now that was
cannonball.
Well, right into the deep end. The events and just the way it worked out. I had one colleague that stayed for 4 weeks, and then another one that joined us and came for a couple weeks. It went very fast, and all my kids are most of them are out of college now, and so that certainly made a difference. But my wife was at home for 5 weeks straight, which that was tough. So fortunately, that's not a regular thing, and we're not, having to do that. But we all kind of held our breath and said, all right, we're just going to make this work and kind of thing. And people ask all the time, oh, do you get to bring your wife over? And she's come a couple of times. And, where you can take advantage of that, that's great. But, she's got her own, responsibilities in the job that she does. And so it doesn't always work out that way. But that 5-week stint was definitely kind of, jump into the deep end and get going. It was great from just getting momentum and going with the job that I had ahead of me and what we're doing at Make You Safe. But that was the longest from a time standpoint that I've dealt with.
Sure. Yeah, and I know I'm going to Oklahoma for a week next week. I'm going to be on an entrepreneurship TV show. I got cast to be on this TV show. Fun. So super kind of an interesting, that's a whole nother story. But yeah. We have a 7-week-old newborn baby girl and a 1.5-year-old son, and my wife has been dreading this trip like up until this whole point. So I'm like, it's okay, we've got support, whatever. I'm only gone for like 6-7 days, whatever it is. But I was laughing because I was telling my friends about this, and apparently I didn't know this, but the town we're going to in Oklahoma is the suicide capital of the world. There's the most suicides per capita there than anywhere in the country.
Okay.
So they're like, you're staying way too long. You're gonna like drink the water. You're gonna start having suicide ideation. You need to get out of there. I'm like, this is so silly. So everyone's been telling me you gotta leave because like my wife wants me home. My friends are joking about that. It's just kind of you gotta come home every once in a while. So
yeah, well, it is hard. It is hard on families for sure, and obviously it doesn't always work out well. And it takes a lot of hard work to keep that going. And I can't sit here and say that I've been perfect at navigating that at home either. But trying to just recognize what it is, mitigate what you can, and bring home chocolate. Doesn't always work, but that's usually one trick that I have. So especially when I've been in Belgium or Switzerland or something like that. But
sure,
yeah, you got to stay connected. And the early years when the kids are so dependent on both of you, that's definitely a tough part of it.
Sure, absolutely. It's interesting too, just the whole travel stuff, because again, that just kind of shapes things. Have there been cultural things that you've seen abroad that you've tried to pick up or bring home in terms of like how people behave in certain situations or clothing things or maybe not driving on the right side of the road because that might get a ticket. But anything that you've picked up while you've been in either Europe or Asia that you're like, man, I love how people do this here. We should do more of this here in America.
That's a great question because I think one of the things I love the most about travel is just understanding other cultures and participating with them in their culture. And I'm sure there are a few things that I've picked up that, I bring home, culturally just because I find them either interesting or they're just good and never thought about it that way. I think from, one standpoint is just a broader view of the world is things definitely I bring home that, that people are people and problems are problems and everyone's just we're all really kind of trying to do the same thing and navigate life successfully in one fashion or other. And just being a part, there's things that I kind of pay attention to now that I didn't. One of my favorite radio stations is Classic FM out of the UK. They run radio, and again, with a background in radio, I also kind of maybe find this fascinating. So if you think of a top 40 radio station that plays classical music, it's not maybe what we would typically hear, of like an NPR style classical music. They're playing music, classical music, but then in between, it's the announcers are a little bit more casual. So, it's just an interesting, different approach, and they're available online. And I used to, in fact, listen to it quite regularly at home, just on our Bluetooth speakers, Classic FM. I just found it, flipped through radio channels when I was driving once in the UK, and it's like, oh, this is kind of a neat, kind of classical radio station. Another one, newstalk.ie. It's a all country news talk radio in Ireland. And there was a guy on in the afternoon called Moncrief who is just fascinating, and listening to kind of local interests, sports, politics, kind of on their own station. I just found that very interesting and would enjoy listening to that. Again, I'd listen to some of these stations live here, and then it would be off a little bit time zone. So I didn't always, I'd hit the late afternoon drive show in Ireland was actually my mid-morning, 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. So occasionally I'd catch Moncrief even when I'm sitting here. So that's just kind of, some of those cultural things. From a people standpoint, I think it's like, how do you understand people? And I love the study of the different cultures, and maybe how they're different from me, and how can I show them my culture, and how can I learn their culture, and just kind of take that step forward. It's probably been one of the most fascinating parts of the travel that I've had. So I'm sure there's a lot more that I've kind of brought home. I'm sure my wife can tell you some of that, but those are maybe some of the highlights.
Sure. My wife, when we went to Europe, I brought home Stroop waffles, and she's been obsessed with them ever since. Like, we go to the grocery store and she'll find them. Like, if we ever go again, bring them back. Like, that's the thing. She loves them that much. But there's again, the food is a big thing, but for me, I'm a foodie. So when I went on my trip, it was for a study abroad. The whole thing was food. So
yeah.
I had lunch 3 times in London at this outdoor market, all the crazy stuff. So that's how I explore culture, is the flavors. That's the thing.
Well, yeah, I suppose you bringing up food does kind of invoke that. I mean, that is probably the number one thing I've brought home, because you mentioned Stroop waffles. So I was just in the Netherlands last week. We're kind of where they're very well known. And another thing that they're known for is Dutch pancake, and it's more like a crepe.
Or a crepe, if you're there.
Right. And
I started saying that, and Paige is always like, quit saying it fancy, it's a crepe. I'm like, they say crepe, and you're in Europe, so.
Yeah, I do find myself doing that sometimes too. But so this pancake is made, and there's different styles and flavors, of course. So it's about the size of, I don't know, 12 or 13, 14-inch pizza. It's big. They're big pancakes, very thin. And then the one that I kind of gravitated towards, it had Gouda and English bacon on top of it. And then you had a syrup and a powdered sugar. And I remember first thinking cheese on a pancake. Is this really something? So I'm like, I'm kind of a win and roam kind of guy. I want to try all the local stuff at least once and see what sticks and what I enjoy. I loved it so much. I actually went to the grocery store, brought back pancake mix, the actual syrup, and the powdered sugar that they just sell in the regular grocery stores in the Netherlands. And we couldn't find the English bacon here in the area. It was a little harder, so we kind of used a prosciutto or something similar. It was close. Certainly got the cheese and figured out how to make these pancakes at home. And so we'll do that on occasion just for fun. There's nothing super magical about them. They're just crepe pancakes and cheese and ham on them. But just the fun of bringing it home and trying it and trying to do it the way they did it was kind of fun and fascinating. So definitely the food is probably the one thing I bring home the most is either the desire for it or even the recipes.
This episode is brought to you by my company, Snod Media Group. Do you like the look and sound of this podcast? Of course you do. It's awesome. There are a ton of benefits to having a podcast. Sharing content online, networking with high-value people, and being a voice in your industry, and the list goes on. If your dreams of starting a podcast have quickly turned into nightmares, realizing how much stuff you have to learn and understand to get a published episode out every single week, I'm here to tell you that I can make your dreams come true. As long as those dreams are podcast related. We are now taking rentals for our podcast room here in the Snod Media Group studio. Gone are the days of spending thousands of dollars and setting up all of your professional camera equipment and probably screwing it up, learning how to capture and produce a professional level show, and probably screwing it up, learning professional video editing, posting social clips on social media, having a distribution calendar, the whole 9 yards. It sounds like a lot because frankly, it is. And let's face it, who has time to do all that stuff anyway? My team and I, that's who. Let us take all of the stress of creating content off of your plate. Simply come in, sit down, record your episode, and leave. A couple days later, you'll have all of your files sent directly to your inbox. It really is that simple. Our quiet studio off the beaten path in Granger, Iowa comes complete with soundproofed walls, as you can see here, wood backdrops, as well as a neutral backdrop, and professional lighting. Utilize over $20,000 worth of camera, audio, and lighting equipment with this turnkey space. You can not only use this podcast room, but other parts of our studio to capture social media content or more conversational pieces as well. We have 3 different packages that can suit your needs and your budget. So let's bring those podcast dreams to reality. For more information about starting your very own podcast here at the studio, visit snodmedia.com/podcast. Now let's get back to the interview. We'll take a pause from this. We're going to jump into the lightning round now. Okay. So we've got we'll just rapid fire some questions here. Some of them I actually had on my list that we've been answering along the way. So we'll try to keep these going here. But number one is the furthest place away in terms of miles that you've traveled.
I think it was probably Sydney. We took a trip down to Tasmania as a side trip. That may be technically the farthest away. It certainly felt that, and it was just fascinating. One of my most favorite travel from a personal standpoint spots that I've been. So
sure. With Tasmania, what were you doing? Like a open roof safari drive? Were you going to the beach? What were you looking at kangaroos? Like what were you doing down there?
Yeah, so we just had kind of a couple days to explore the coast in a city called Hobart and just learning about some of the Adventure Bay is one of the places down there where the explorers and where expeditions to the Antarctica started from. So there's a lot of naval history in Australia, but Tasmania specifically. And then we did a food tour. Again, speaking of food, and oysters and honey and cheese, and there's some just interesting agriculture out of that part. I mean, the whole island. I mean, it's a small populated island, and there's a couple of kind of areas, but the rest of it is this national forest and parks. It's a beautiful, section of Australia with just some fascinating history. And so we just, kind of thought, well, that'd be maybe a off the beaten path kind of thing to do as a tourist, if you will. Mm-hmm. And thought, so we kind of, chose to do that, and then took the boat ride pretty far south into the along the islands where, like I said, some of those exhibitions to the South Pole had started. That's just fascinating.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Next question was biggest disparities that you've seen while traveling that makes you appreciate living in America?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've had some personal travels to parts of Brazil that certainly, would definitely consider poor areas, and was on a missions trip a number of years ago. And they worked with families that were definitely very poor. I remember thinking, I complain because I don't have a third car garage or some, first world problems, as we like to say, when I met some happy people with very little. And it was just kind of eye opening. It's sad in some respect but at the same time, not everybody needs to think the way Americans do, right? And I don't need to force and apply what happiness is for me on everyone else. But at the same time, there's real needs there, and how do you support that? And so I've seen a little bit of that in my travels here and there, and it's definitely heartbreaking in some respects, and difficult just to see the disparity between how people live. So
yep. We just had the Brazilian twins on a couple episodes ago, and similarly, they grew up in the slums of Rio, and it's like they never left, so they didn't know any different. And then they come to America, and they're like completely like there's other ways to live, and you kind of like open your mind. So it's like it's interesting to hear that piece. For me, when I traveled, it was when we went to Cancun, Mexico, because there's all these beachfront resorts, there's all this money and infrastructure there. And then the majority of people are like living in lean-tos. It's just like such a different, there's no middle class, so to speak there. It's just like all one side or the other. So that's super interesting to hear. Dream car. If you could have any car in your 2-car garage, which car would you have in there?
Yeah, I mean, if I typically say it's a 5 Series BMW black with cream interior.
Okay. Is there a reason you've had that in your mind, like as a kid, like it's on the wall or something?
No, because as a kid it was a black Trans Am T-top, because Smokey and the Bandit, it's like I always wanted to have that. So that was more of a kid car. And while there's all sorts of other interesting cars, and even there's a 4 Series M Series BMW that's probably cooler. But for some reason, I've always gravitated towards the 5 Series. I will probably never own one in my life. There's no practical reason to have one, but I like the car and the stylings and the technology. And, I was at the Detroit Auto Show not too long ago for an event, and seeing some of the new tech that BMW was showing off just in some of the interior. I've been to BMW World in Munich a couple of times, and I don't know. That's just kind of where I gravitate. There's a lot of cars that I like.
Interest in like Tesla or electric or any of that kind of like Cybertruck or anything?
Sure. I think if I was going to go electric, I mean, the i8, again, I'm going to stick with BMW there, is probably the coolest looking one, though the Tesla is certainly appealing. Actually, but if I was going to pick if I'm going to go buy a electric vehicle right now, and I'd buy the Volvo kind of SUV version. I really like the way it looks, and I'm also kind of a Volvo guy myself. But
Sure. I did an auto commercial a couple weeks ago for an electric vehicle battery company. So we had a bunch of like a whole fleet of different ones, and the most interesting to me was the F-150 Lightning, because you open the front where the engine's supposed to be. And we could fit 3 Yeti coolers in there. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, there's a frunk. It's like the engine's the size of a watermelon, and it can go faster than a truck. It's like the technology's kind of crazy. So.
It really is. I don't own an electric vehicle at this point, not for a lack of want to, but I've been in many and had friends that have owned a variety of them, and I do find them fascinating.
Sure. No, I love it. Let's see here. The most interesting food that you've eaten abroad, like one that you'd tell people and they'd probably cringe, like scorpions or something kind of wild or crazy that you've eaten?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm fairly open to trying new things. And I mean, there's certain, I wouldn't say I'm crazy over seafood, though I do eat a lot of seafood, but sometimes, depending upon presentation, it can just look interesting. I remember when I was in Japan and we were out and kind of had I don't know, it was a variety of things that were on a tray for us to eat. And I remember just kind of eating out of this little little crucible-sized dish, and I thought it was some kind of vegetable or plant or something or whatever, and they were fine. I was eating, they were good, and I eventually kind of looked down and saw, oh, there's eyes looking back at me, and it's like they were little like minnow type things, just whole, and it was like I'd already eaten half of them.
They must taste pretty good.
And I don't know that I would have not if I had noticed initially, because I finished them. And part of that is just because I've, over the years of having sushi or some other exotic things, I've just kind of mentally been able to figure that out. But it can be very intimidating to think, especially if you've not had or experienced whole fish and looking back at you. That's the first one that comes to mind. I've enjoyed. Like I said, I try to, when in Rome, I always ask, what's the local dish? What do locals eat here? And I was in Poland and they said wild boar. So, okay, that's what we had for dinner that night. I was in Malta and they said it was rabbit. That was one I probably least favored. It was
a little gamey, a little chewy. Yeah. I had rabbit as well. And it's not even in Iowa. It was in London, I believe. No, Paris. I was in Paris. So, I just had it once, so I don't want to judge it for all of eternity that it was, maybe not my favorite, but that particular one. But the escargot, people kind of turn their nose up. As speaking of France, I've had escargot in many places, and it's actually, if it's prepared well, it is very good. Sure.
I do enjoy that. But some people are like, well, you're eating what? So type of thing. Some of it's mental, right? And some of it is certainly your personal tastes and flavors. But I always, growing up with our kids, when they would be served a plate of food, whether it was home or somewhere else, a guest house, we always had to say they had to take a no thank you portion. You had to at least take some to try, and that at the very least. So I kind of applied that same. I got to at least try everything that's put in front of me, and I've really enjoyed. It's opened up a lot of exotic or near exotic type cuisine that I've really enjoyed.
Sure, no, I love that. I know for my son, he's 1.5 years, and my wife did a trip a couple months ago. And I'm like, finally, because then I'm like cooking fish and all the stuff that she hates, like stinking the house up. And he was eating all of it. He's like, yummy. Like, this is good. I'm like, we got to diversify your palate while you're young, or else you're never going to try these things.
I think there's some truth to that. There's definitely some truth to that. Exposing, again, it's just being exposed to other things outside of, your norm is a good thing. For sure. Yeah. Food included.
Absolutely. The last question I had relating to travel was, of all the places you've gone, where's the place that you recommend people, like, you've got to go here? It's so unique or so different or so interesting. Where's the place that people should go if they're going to go anywhere in the world?
That's such a hard question to ask because it's related to the question I get all the time, where's your favorite place? And it's hard to answer because there's just been so many interesting places depending upon what you're looking for. So what's on my list typically, especially if you're talking about Europe, Edinburgh is one of my favorite cities in Scotland. It's somehow been able to maintain its old world charm in the city center, and the topography and where the castle sits and the history of the city is just fascinating. On the other end, Barcelona is a favorite city in terms of just laid-back culture, the beach, the Mediterranean, the Sagrada Familia, the Gaudi architecture that's there. There's just something very appealing about Barcelona in Spain. And then in the middle is Switzerland, just about anywhere. I mean, to me, if I'm going to pick one place, Switzerland usually comes to the top of the list, thinking about the mixture between the French, the German, and the Italian cultures, how diverse the country is by itself, and then the Swiss mountains. I mean, it's just they're just unbelievable. So, Lucerne is probably probably my most favorite location in all of Europe because of being in the middle of the Swiss Alps. You're not that far away from Zurich. You're not that far away from Milan. You've just got the center of Europe right there at you, and it's such a beautiful country. But like I said, it's so hard to pick because I fell in love with Sydney while we were there, and I've mentioned Singapore a couple of times is probably one of my most favorite cities in the world. So I'd have to maybe get what are you most interested in, right? To narrow that down a little bit. Right. Is it beaches? Is it architecture? Is it history? But if you've never been, people sometimes like scoff at, doing the typical tourist things. No, do the typical tourist things. Do those. Go to Paris, go to London, see Big Ben, see the Eiffel Tower, right? Do those things. Those are important things. They're fascinating. There's a lot to do and see there. And don't necessarily have to fret about, go do those things. Those are still very, very cool things to do. And then you can branch off from there. In any of those cases. So
I love it. That concludes the lightning round. You can stop sweating so much now. Yeah. But no, I totally concur with that. I think it's super interesting though, because for Paige and I, we got really into hiking. So whenever we would go anywhere new, we went to Nashville in October. She was like 8 months pregnant. We still went on a hike because that's kind of the thing we do, and just kind of explore like the wilderness or the hiking trails or whatever. We were in Greece. We hiked the Samaria Gorge for 8 hours, which was super fun. Like, there's so many things like I feel like just getting out and experiencing that. Even domestic stuff. When we go to Phoenix, we'll go to hike Camelback Mountain and just kind of like stuff like that. I think it's just an interesting way that we find it. And some people it's food, some people it's experiences, some people it's like you said, architecture, the guided tours. If you're in Hollywood, hey, Tom Cruise's house, whatever it's your thing. I feel like finding that is really important.
Yeah. No, then the diversity of just about any place you can go, you can find a piece of that, right? And do some of maybe the more typical touristy things. But then, I've taken up running late in life, and part of the traveling. I love to run in new cities or new places because you get to see the city from a different perspective and from a very local, standpoint, and doing it at a different kind of pace. And I've really enjoyed some of that, and seeing one of my favorite runs was around the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. It was, I think, a 5K all the way around it or something to that effect, but just a nice way to get into the city, see something different. And there's so many different ways you can view a place outside of just the typical tourist type side of it.
I love it. Bringing it kind of back to current day, we kind of mentioned early on that you're with Make You Safe now. Can you just kind of explain for people listening, like, how did Make You Safe come to be? What is kind of the story of the company, and then what's kind of the like in common practice, like where do you see the company engaging with people in the workplace with workplace safety?
Yeah, so Gabe Glenn is one of our co-founder, and kind of he had the original vision for this our device, and part of it came from the fact that his dad worked in a manufacturing setting, was in charge of 2,000 people, their safety. And he remembers thinking, how could one person really understand the complexities of an organization and keep 2,000 people safe, and not just feel like an accident investigator, but how do we use technology to provide leading indicator data, get ahead of where risk might be showing up in the workplace. And that was really the genesis of the idea. And originally kind of thought, okay, this wearable, you wear it on your armband, and there could be some spatial aspect to it. There could be some, like I said, environmental data collecting, side of it. And that's ultimately where it ended up, looking at environmental working conditions and physicality. And then it kind of grew from there. We have a communication feature that we call My Voice, where a frontline worker can push a button and leave a quick voice memo. Because a lot of times these near misses, as they're called in the safety world, of where, hey, I tripped here and this is probably going to happen again, and then eventually that somebody gets hurt because, over time that's typically what happens. Well, those near misses are hard and underreported, just because if I didn't get hurt or something didn't get broken, people just don't say anything. So we're trying to provide communication tools that helps the frontline workers be able to make an observation, a continuous improvement idea, a maintenance request. Hey, the guard on machine 6 is broken in sector 7G. So a quick little voice memo. They don't have to then, fill out a form, remember to tell somebody at the end of their shift, go find a supervisor. It was just done in the moment, quick and easy, and it's logged. So that's a big feature. A part of this is not just monitoring the risk data that we are, but also providing a communication tool. Mm-hmm. And then our latest release is a product called Interact, where we talk about the connected worker and the frontline worker, and and not only looking at the health and safety side, but looking at how we interact with the machines around us, and to not only we see the machines, but the machines can see us. And not only are there particular safety implications, but then there's productivity implications where the use case that we often share is a production line where a conveyor belt's, there's a process going on and there's 4 people there. And I walk up. The traditional process is that the line speed, somebody has to manually turn that up. Or if I walk away, now it's going too fast for the people there to keep up. And that causes all sorts of safety and productivity and quality challenges. So our Interact device can actually integrate in with automation systems to detect, oh, hey, Aaron's here. Let's speed up to 4-person speed. Oh, Aaron just left. Let's turn back down to 3-person speed to kind of match that productivity and safety all in, kind of one interactive way, but it's very passive to the systems, very passive to the users. It's just how they're interacting on a day-to-day basis with what's around them. So,
sure.
So manufacturing, food production, bottling, logistics, distribution centers, construction, those are a lot of the places where we're finding the most success.
Sure. Well, and we just had Sam Mitigation on. He was the founder of Carpathian, and it's similar to that. His first use case was the rock climbing world because it's like AI. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yeah, yes. There was a news article, maybe been a year ago or so. I've seen. Yeah, so I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. So he was just on. He's in the sheer startup stage. There's like 2 people in the startup. They're trying to get funding and figure out what niche they want to go to because it's like climbing's one area, but that's such a neat but there's only
so using cameras and AI to detect where risk is. Yeah,
exactly. Where you're using wearables, it would be more of an alert system where if you're in a warehouse and somebody is about to fall or trip, the camera would detect it, notify the safety manager, and they could step in. Or they're trying to figure that process out. So that would be interesting. I might have to connect you guys. So
absolutely.
Because he's just all about this stuff. It's super interesting. But
yeah, no, the advancements in the health and safety world are really skyrocketing. With technology and the opportunity there is fantastic, and it's fun to be a part of that transformation and see that change, and obviously the impact on the goal is come to work, do work safely, and go home. Right. And there are certainly jobs that are more risky than others. And how do you help mitigate that risk or eliminate it altogether? So it's a great industry to be a part of.
Sure. Well, in terms of the payoff at the end of the day is we're keeping people safe, but also improving productivity. But also the challenging of probably the R&D department is how do we help solve more problems to help keep people safe? So it's not just one product. It's the whole fleet of it and everything. Because how big is the company now?
We're about 30 people.
Okay.
I think we're going on 8 years old. The product officially launched in 2020. So if you remember what was happening in 2020, maybe not necessarily the best.
I try not to remember.
Yeah,
all the stuff that was going on.
It ended up. We did a lot of product development, and it's one of the things that I repeatedly tell people: the time and effort that Gabe and his co-founder Mark Frederick put into really understanding the need in the marketplace and designing a really robust product is really served us well. We spent a few years, they did early on, developing that and working with some beta customers and getting a product that they felt was ready to go on the market. Sometimes it's easy, or the desire to get to market fast and it's not quite ready is there, but their ability to be able to do that, I think, has served us very well long term. And then that meant we were launching in late 19, early 20. But that we had a beta customer during that time period, right at our launch, that actually helped us morph into this Interact product because at the time we were looking at contact tracing, right? That was the thing. And the technology stack has Bluetooth, is Bluetooth enabled, so we can tell how far apart one device is from the other. Well, that led to, well, can you tell me, who's been next to each other for more than 15 minutes, 6 feet or whatever the rules were. But that really broadened out to this spatial awareness and understanding how does that affect work, safety, productivity, and what can we do to help bring insight beyond just the social or the social contact tracing type of thing, but interacting then ultimately with the machines around them too as well. So we took that in stride and came out of the other side, stronger. And we've been on our path and journey to grow the company and to spread the word and tell the story. So it's been a great journey, and I'm literally coming up on my 1-year anniversary. So
congratulations!
It's definitely very fresh still for me, and we have a fantastic team. Like I said, Mark, and he's our CTO, and his engineering team have built an incredible, robust product, and we're still uncovering use cases because the way the technology can interact and the way the customers are responding. Hey, what if you could do this or tell us this and that type of thing? So it's been to be on just a small part of that journey.
Well, it's especially as you guys expand the company, I can just see the growth potential of this, where if you got, get in with a large manufacturer like Toyota or something, where it's like, okay, we'll do a beta test with this factory. It's working great. And then we expand to all the other 50 factories or whatever. What's kind of the growth plan for the company that you guys have outlined, and where you fit into that as you guys are kind of going international?
Yeah, well, you just described it. And that's kind of where we're at right now, in the middle of working with some very large organizations. And most of them are multinational. And so they're driving us outside of North America. So that was part of the catalyst to, let's focus. Europe is a big target for us, from a market standpoint, just because I think there's a lot of similarities. And in some ways, they're ahead of us in terms of some health and safety focus. And so that was a natural fit. But we're following our customers there. We're following where some of the industry interests are out there. But that, what you just described is what we're finding. We're in that phase where we've had a number of pilots go very well. They've expanded to different locations, and now we're getting even further into organizations. So it's definitely been a big part of our growth.
Sure. No, I love it. What's been the most biggest learning curve you had to have in this new role? Because you were just doing micromolding plastics for almost 20 years. What's the biggest thing that you had to really learn up on or get acclimated with this new industry?
Great question. So I tell people, I've spent 18 years in manufacturing, and it's kind of being in there. I was safety adjacent. I participated in it. I understood it, but I wasn't responsible for it, right? We had our safety regulations at AccuMold, safety regulations at any of the customers we would go visit, so I participated. So I completely understand the point and how it worked, right? But again, being participant and being in charge of it are two different things, right? So most of us at MakeYouSafe have gone through a certification process. So I am a Certified Occupational Safety Specialist, COSS. And it's basically learning around OSHA training and observations and being able to recognize, safe and unsafe, type of thing. So it was a training process that, again, never really had to participate in and had to learn. And that brings up an interesting topic because, in my career journey, one thing that I've appreciated, or I fell into maybe halfway through my journey so far, was reading. And that was another aspect to coming on at MakeYouSafe. One of my colleagues says, here are the kind of the top 5 things to read. Industry leaders and influencers and those that are talking about the future of health and safety, and I just devour that stuff. I've become a reader, and that's served me well. So devouring, basically everything that I could get, jumping into the cost training, because I did. I had a whole new world to learn and figure out and understand, and how to articulate, and the importances of it, and being able to speak the language, because it's definitely a language, and I'm still on that learning journey. By no means the expert at it, but it's been I think I've enjoyed that part the most, the learning of something new, and maybe what was so exciting about leaving a career after 18 years to do something very different, and learning something new. So
sure, because I'm assuming reading is probably how you pass the time on all these flights and traveling. Or are you one of those people that just like sleeps on planes and you can just pass out anywhere?
No, I do not sleep very well on planes, even when I have the luxury of the full laydowns. It's just they're just not quite long enough. I'm 6'1", and I think they're 6 foot, right?
Oh,
And
sure.
so my toes always bend the wrong way. But I kind of have a rule, and I don't do this, every time, but I have this rule. If I've got a book that I'm working on, 2 chapters on ascension and 2 chapters on descend. And even if I'm just going to California, and that's usually a trip, stop at Denver, that's 8 chapters, right? 2 up, 2 down, 2 up, 2 down, right? That's just getting out there. And coming back, most, business type books are 8 to 12 chapters. You can read a whole book. And people, I still this day, I think people, it's kind of like the opening the doors to travel. Once you start to realize how simple and easy it is, even if you just find those moments, reading is one of those things you can jump yourself into. But people will look at a 200-page book and like, I don't have time to read all that. I was like,
sure.
You probably do. You just don't realize, how to structure yourself so you can get through it. I've been fortunate that I do a lot of my reading on airplanes, not exclusively, but that's been one thing I have definitely taken advantage of, and that's helped with the types of things that I read now. I tend to lean towards more business and that type of stuff or industry related materials, though I forced myself to because I do enjoy fiction. And Reacher's a big, series now on Amazon. So I'm like, I've started to go back. Let's read some of, the Reacher series.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of forced myself to do some fiction reading just for something different and fresh. But yeah, definitely reading has been an important part of my journey.
Before we had kids, I would always get up. I had like a whole morning routine. I would run with the dog in the morning, make breakfast. I would read for like 45 minutes. Now there's not as much time for that. But I remember the year that I did that for an entire year, I got through 15 books, physical books, and then 3 audiobooks on in the car commuting because I was all about it. And the amount of stuff, if you read the right stuff, the amount that you can just surpass anyone that's learning something about that. What's kind of a go-to book that you would recommend somebody in terms of business, entrepreneurship, productivity? What's 1 or 2 that just jumps at your head?
I'll give you my 2 favorite authors, and they're favorites for a reason. And one's Dan Pink, and the other one is Malcolm Gladwell. And if I was going to throw a third one in there, it's the Freakonomics guys. Those 3 guys, or it's actually 4, together to me paint a really interesting picture about the cause and effect and the things that happen. The Malcolm Gladwell book Outliers is probably my top favorite, and just working through what does opportunity mean, how do people get to where they are, and can you manufacture that, right? Mm-hmm. Malcolm writes in there that people like Bill Gates or Michael Jordan is just all this talent that they have that allow them to be who they are, and while certainly talent is a piece of that, they also had opportunities at the right time and the right way that kind of all came together to kind of put them in those places. And it's kind of fascinating thinking about when you juxtapose that with cause and effect with Freakonomics. It's like, do we really understand cause and effect in the world? Or correlation doesn't mean causation. And you think about how can you manufacture opportunities, or how do you get to a certain outcomes? And do we really understand what we're doing and the effects that it might have downstream, and putting that together. And then you overlay, like Dan Pink writes a lot about kind of our psychological aspect of work and creativity and drive. To me, those 3, if you're not a reader and you're going to start somewhere and you're thinking about it in that space, those are great places to start. There's a lot that's out there. I could kind of spend a whole other podcast just talking about my favorite authors, but
sure,
those 3 groups are probably my favorite.
Sure. When I was going through that process, I was reading entrepreneurship marketing, but also the ones that I said that made the biggest impact for me were things that I implemented in my business, which was Profit First with Mike McAllowitz. That's how I do my accounting now. So when people say, what's the big, I'm like, that book changed how my cash flows in and out of my business. That's huge. Another one was reading biographies or autobiographies from successful entrepreneurs. Like I read Shoe Dogs from Phil Knight, CEO of Nike.
Right.
His whole like selling shoes at track meets out of his trunk to running the largest athletic brand ever. Like stuff like that. I just love hearing the stories. And then for me, other ones of like just inspirational stories of grit, life experience, like Child Called It, Can't Hurt Me with David Goggins, like some of these narratives that people just reflect on their life of like going through some of the hardest stuff you've ever understood. And again, that gives you kind of perspective of like, man, I'm worried about not having a third bay car in my garage. That this person like runs with broken legs because they're just trying to like figure out the depths of their mind they can go to. It's like you can kind of learn some of those crazy things. So those are good. I'll have to add those to my list. I have a couple on my shelf that I just realized I haven't read, and I'm flying next week. So
there you go.
You've inspired me to take a book instead of my iPad and watching 3 movies on the flight because I love movies too. So.
2 chapters on the way up, 2 chapters on the way down, and the book will be done before you get home.
Sure. I love it. Kind of tying it all together here. I know we wanted to just dip in really quick. You mentioned you were involved in school board and stuff like that. How has that been kind of a rewarding piece to again, fill your cups in other areas outside of business when you're doing travel, you're doing business, kind of getting involved in the community and helping with that type of stuff?
Yeah, I've always kind of had the attitude that, you can't complain unless you're willing to help. And it doesn't have to be like all into the deep end kind of help, but in some fashion. And for me, that was getting involved. I moved to our community, Ankeny, in 2000 from Chicagoland. And ended up getting involved right away through a mutual friend who was on the city council. Got me involved. I was on the park board for a while, ended up on planning and zoning after that. Thought maybe I had a path towards maybe I was going to be on city council at some point. But I enjoy the civic process. I enjoy being involved, providing insights and just, being a representative of my community. And along that way, about 2005, it was 2006, 7, somewhere in that time frame, started kind of getting interested in what was happening in the school district, and kids were kind of getting older and into the elementary and grade school type of process, and so ended up running for school board in Ankeny in 2008, I think it was. And that has been such an interesting process, and it was actually very transformative to me personally because, you listening may not really understand or know the history of where Ankeny has been in terms of high schools and whatnot in the last 15 years. But Ankeny was the first community since I think Iowa City 40 years prior, something like that split into 2 high schools, right? So it was a big cultural and emotional and a change to the idea of the community moving from 1 high school to 2 high schools. And not everybody was in favor of it. And that was okay. I mean, there was no right or wrong to it necessarily in terms of.
Well, and you guys were going so fast.
Yes.
Like it had to happen. It's just too big.
Well, that was my opinion. So anyway, but that met its challenge, and it was an interesting time to be on the school board when you had part of the town that was absolutely for it and part of the town that was not for it, and the skin thickening, I guess, process you go through and understanding, vote the way you believe that you can sleep good at night. And that's all you can ask of anyone, just the perspective I held. So ultimately, we ended up getting fired. The 4 of us that voted for the 2 high schools ultimately ended up getting fired. That's how I call it. We got voted out, right? Voted off the island. That next election cycle, because coincidentally the 4 of us were up and we were the 4 that happened to put that all together. But I slept good at night knowing, hey, I made a decision I felt was in the best interest and long-term viability of the community, the students, and the objective that we have as a district. I stayed involved, ended up getting reelected again at another cycle a few years later, and then stayed on for a number of years. And then my last term was going to finish just as COVID kind of came along. And I thought going through 2 high schools was tough, being on the school board. Not even close. I mean, COVID was excruciating because no one was happy with any decision. I mean, it was again, politically charged, emotionally charged. There's just a lot to it. Trying to decipher and understand all this coming at you in real time, and what it is and what it isn't, and how it came to be. We had some challenges on our board, but I think we tried very hard to keep it civil, if you will,
which is hard at that time.
Yeah,
very
because
hard.
There was news in communities where it wasn't, and we tried very hard to hear from people in Ankeny what their beliefs were, and the hours and hours and hours of meetings that we had, and learning how to do it all on Zoom and hearing from our community in a way that we never have before. So there was a lot of, benefits to that, but it was definitely a difficult time. But there was a piece of it that, again, you can't excuse the personal growth that comes out of that challenge of it. But then the weight of knowing the importance of the decisions that you're making and the impact that they have. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience on school board. I think in total I served 13 years with that little sabbatical in the middle. I enjoyed the hard part, the fun part. To me, my most favorite day, and I tell people all this time, is graduation day and handing kids diplomas. Because ultimately that's what we're there to do, is to help them achieve, to graduate, to get to that point, and to see their smiling faces and nervous kind of faces across the clammy hands, crossing the stage and shaking their hands and giving them a diploma. To me, that's my favorite. That was my favorite day as a school board member. As the reward for, what we're trying to build to help, our students be successful ultimately. So
I love that.
Yeah.
In that process, you mentioned like COVID being super challenging. What was probably the biggest thing you learned about yourself over these over 10 years of being on school board? What's kind of the thing you learned about yourself when put under the frying pan with the spotlight on you? What's something that you learned about that from yourself?
Well, prior to COVID, our meetings weren't recorded, and nobody came. There was little interest, and so certainly all of a sudden it went from 0 to 100. And we were not recognized. People, if you didn't pay attention to the school races or who your school board member was prior to COVID, you just didn't know. Staff did, because obviously it was high interest for sure.
Well, and having a name like Aaron Johnson, you can really just hide under the radar.
Sure.
You're just like,
yes,
John Smith. No one knows who you are.
Right. Well, during COVID, and especially as we were able to kind of get to the grocery store and things kind of opened up a little bit more, and it was interesting to be recognized at places that I never was recognized before. But also meant people were scrutinizing and double, guessing and armchair quarterbacking, not just my decision, but all of ours, right? Whether some of us made a decision over here or some of us made a decision over here, there was always a group of people that didn't like it, whichever direction you want to look at it. And so one, it was just being able to get some of this really raw feedback and understand what's personal and what's not personal, right? And for me, having gone through the 2 high school split helped in that crisis, because I had already learned some of that and was able to help coach, some of my colleagues through. It's really hard when you have half the community picking on you, right? And all of us had half the community picking on us, because it was pretty much how the interest went. But I got some feedback, because now again people are watching what's going on, and it's like, you know what? I have to take that feedback. That's good feedback. Let's take away maybe the emotional charge of what it is, and just, is this really? And that had more to do with maybe how I was presenting myself during a meeting or something like that. Okay, that's a good observation. Again, we're all now on a spotlight in a real time, trying to navigate something with thousands of eyes looking at us, and kind of digesting it, criticizing it, liking it, all the above type of thing. So there was definitely a learning curve or learning out of that I did appreciate, though. You don't like it in the middle of it, but you like the growth that comes out of it at the end. So,
sure.
Wouldn't wish it ever again. But I will appreciate what it taught me personally, through perseverance and just the perspective of, what I was trying to accomplish.
I think the biggest piece I took from that was the first thing you said was, if you can't have an opinion on something if you're not willing to be a part of the solution, or you can't be complaining about something if you're not willing to be part of the solution. I think that's so powerful because so many people have opinions, whether it's political, school board, the community, whatever, but they never want to be a part of the solution. They just come with the problems.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge piece to really, how can I be a part of the change and not continue to perpetuate the problem?
Right.
Like, it's a lot easier to yell at someone in a grocery store because they're on a school board that you don't agree with them. Go to the meetings, write up a little thing to explain your stance, like share in a civil way and see if you can get the change enacted instead of just yelling because it's easy and less effort.
Yeah. And again, you don't have to jump all in and run for an election to be involved, right? Volunteer in your kid's classroom or get on a committee, or as you said, just articulate your thoughts in a thoughtful and constructive manner. There's definitely ways for sure.
No, I love it. We could probably talk all day. I think this is a great kind of place to put a pin in it for now. We have to have you back on a follow-up episode. Where can people learn more about you if they want to connect, learn more about Make You Safe, or ask for another book recommendation? Where would you send people?
Yeah, so I mentioned I'm not big on social media, but I am big on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm the most active. You can find me, Aaron Johnson, Make You Safe. Is probably the quickest way to find me on LinkedIn. I am there pretty regularly, certainly both from a personal, professional standpoint and work-wise. Make You Safe is MAKUSAFE. MakeYouSafe.com is where you can find a lot more about us and our organization. I'm certainly willing to check that out. And, whether you want to connect about the health and safety business or, recommendations about books, I'd be glad to connect and chat. Just let me know you heard me on Ryan's podcast.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If you've made it this far in the show, you guys know what to do. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Subscribe if you're listening or watching on YouTube or Spotify. And tune in on social media for clips from all of our shows. We're almost to 50 episodes, so closing in on that 1-year timestamp. So if you've made it this far, thanks again so much for listening. My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening to Rhymes with Odd. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace. Thank you so much for watching yet another episode of the Rhymes with Odd podcast. We really do appreciate your support. If you could give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, that makes a world of difference, guys. Also, if you're tuning in on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and check us out on social media. Also, if you'd like to inquire more about our services here at Snod Media Group or learn about doing your own podcast for your own business, you can find us at snodmedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.